Hello, online world. It is a brand new month, brand new Tuesday. Welcome to Off the Record with Migs. Jessica, sorry, you're on mute. Sorry, Jessica.
How did my mic not unmute? But anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday evening. And of course, Off the Record is now on ABS-CBN Sports.
And of course, you could do follow. Please do follow at ABS-CBN Sports on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter for your daily sports habit. Okay, so brand new week, Cheska. Last week, medyo nag-marathon interviews tayo. Pagdating sa Road to UAP special, we were very
Yes,
fortunate that we got to interview actually 8 teams,
we
representatives from
got
eight
we got all
teams.
eight teams for our
Got all eight
UAAP
teams.
Season 85 preview. We hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, and of course, nagpapasalamat po kami sa lahat ng mga kapamilya watching live right now on YouTube. And actually, Cheska, right now, pag sapit pala ng October, over the weekend, naging malaman ang ating sports headlines. Starting off with the UAP, PBA's there, women's also, 3x3, etc. But there was this um, news,
Mhm.
football news that shocked the world. If you've read
Yes.
it on BBC, on CNN, on World News, marami pong mga nasawi, namatay sa isang football match sa Indonesia.
Yes, this happened at the Kanjuruhan Stadium in Indonesia. Over 100 people were killed, with fans being trampled to death after Arema FC, I hope I'm saying that right, Arema FC lost to Persebaya Surabaya on home turf for the first time in 23 years. And of course, joining us tonight is a familiar face to Philippine football fans, former coach of the Philippine Azkals, and currently the technical director of Bayangkara FC. Simon McMenemy is with us tonight.
Hey, Simon, I kindly unmute. I will unmute your mic. There
There
you
you
go. Hi,
go.
There we
Simon.
go. There we go. Yeah, now we can talk. Hey, nice to see you. Good to be back.
Thank you so much for guesting on the show, Simon. I mean, again, I wish it were under more joyful circumstances, but the events that transpired over the weekend do need to be talked about because it's just one of the most devastating things to witness in any sport whatsoever.
Yeah, it really is. It was. We have a lot of issues in Indonesian football. Slightly different from Filipino football. Filipino football, obviously, very new to the football game. In Indonesia, it goes back a long way, and these two teams really don't like each other. That being said, there is no way that dislike should have led to the tragic scenes that we saw. So there's a lot of discussion at the minute, and there's a lot of trying to get to the bottom of exactly how this transpired, the series of events or the series of failures that led to the tragic loss of life.
Right. And go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, no, I was gonna ask because you already brought up the history between these two teams. Could you maybe expound on that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. They're two of the biggest supported teams in the country, and they are less than an hour away from each other by road. So it means that they're always in each other's faces. They're always close. They're the bar that how are Roma doing, how are Persebaya doing, or we're doing better than them. It doesn't matter really where they are in the league. It's about these games. For other teams, they have their own rivalries, but for these two, they are sworn enemies in terms of the supporters, and that often leads to hooliganism and incidents, either in the street, in the car park, or in the stadium itself. And it's sadly, Indonesian football is littered with horrific stories of incidents, basically because two sets of fans don't like each other.
To further uh, deep dive on the context, pardon me, Simon, if I will speak in Filipino a bit. Of course,
That's
para po sa mga
kind of used
audience
to that.
natin, sa audience natin sa ABS-CBN Sports, hindi ganon kalaki, I guess, you would say in that sense, ang football dito. Kaya mas gusto nating maintindihan. We want to further understand why this transpired, why this happened in a neighboring country where it's a football nation, right, Simon? You
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah, for
about the
sure.
brief history of this, but more deep dive, where did this all come from and why did it result to such an event where it was out of control due to numerous factors?
Yeah, it was obviously going to be a big game, and there was a lot of build up to the game, and the players will tell you themselves that it is all about that game. It's the first game they look for on the schedule when it comes out at the beginning of the season. So there's a lot of build up to that game. And there was even talk of trying to play the game in the afternoon as to kind of keep the numbers a little bit lower, make it a little bit more difficult for, the stadium to be full and it to be rammed. There was no away fans, even though they were only an hour away. There was no away fans allowed in the stadium. So there was only Arema fans in the stadium. That's very important to know, because a lot of news agencies, when it first kicked off, when the news came out, thought, oh, it's just two fans kicking off and, going at it in the stands. It wasn't. There was 40,000 Arema fans, no Persebaya fans whatsoever. That number, in fact, also, as a matter of contention and investigation right now, that stadium only holds 38,000. So why there was 40,000 fans in the stadium? But this was admitted to by the security staff, by a lot of people, saying that we've managed to sell 40,000 tickets for the game, as almost a boast, as almost a, wow, this is fantastic. Look how many people are going to come to the game. Well, it definitely backfired. For me, there were three factors in this. The first factor being the supporters not liking the fact they lost. For no other reason, they lost the game. It can't just be about winning and losing. It can't just be about, well, they played better. They sneaked a goal at the end, whatever it was. They lost 3-2. It was a tight game all the way through. It could have been Arema that won, but it was Persebaya this time. The fans didn't accept that. They wanted to get on the pitch. They wanted to go and remonstrate with the players. They were tearing seats out their own stadium and throwing them. Such is the Indonesian way, sadly. And this is something I've experienced many times. You lose a game and it kicks off.
So in a way, Simon, sorry for cutting here.
Right.
So in a way, it was a protest against their team. That's why they were, going out of control.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
That's effectively what started the chain of events. Sadly, the second factor being the police's reaction to that running onto the pitch. The police's reaction, to start with, was to take them back into the stands, to push them back in. They did it with a lot of force, as we've seen on a lot of videos, and there's been a lot of investigations. I think some heads of police and blah, blah, blah been sacked and moved on from their jobs due to the force of that pushing back of fans. The third factor would be the suitability of the stadium. They managed to get them back into the stands. They then decided, for whatever reason, to fire tear gas in. That pushing them back wasn't enough. They fired tear gas in, and not just a little bit of tear gas, substantial amounts of tear gas, into a stadium and an old school stand that only had limited access entry. So everybody then piled out trying to get away from the tear gas. You have an over brimming stadium trying to get out of these small exits. And that's where the major loss of life was. There was just nowhere to go. And those that had tried to get out early then got caught in the cram because everyone came running out behind them. And there was, quite sadly, I was talking to one of my ex-players today who was playing in that game. He's been traumatized to a point where he doesn't know if he's going to play football again, because he was telling me that he went back out along with a load of other fans to try and remonstrate with the fans to just get them to calm down, just relax, please calm down, which often happens. The players go out there and they try and ask the stands to calm down. They went back out and ended up helping the injured back into the locker rooms to get them away from what was going on the pitch in the stands. They brought 20 or so fans into the locker room, and sadly 4 of them died in the locker room in front of the players as the players were getting changed. It's a horrific story. But this is coming from a player that I've been coaching for the last 3 or 4 years. And he's telling me he doesn't know whether he's going to be able to play football again because he saw people die in front of it. People he helped into the stadium, into the locker room to try and get away from it. They died on the floor of the changing room. Horrible stories coming out. Really horrible stories that is going to have a deep-rooted effect in football here on in. It really has to.
Sadly, this is not the first that we've seen in football tragedies. There's a long-running history. The Lima football riots in 1964, where 328 people died. There was the Hillsborough in 1989, I believe, Liverpool fans. And then most recently, I believe it was in Egypt, Port Said in 2012. And that led to the Egyptian Premier League shutting down for 2 years. It's been just a few days since the tragedy in Indonesia, but in terms of solutions in terms of looking forward, in terms of making sure that this does not happen again? Has there been any word whatsoever as to what the approach will be?
I've not seen anything as yet. In terms of currently what has happened, I'm aware of a number of sackings and people being moved from positions that were in areas of responsibility on that night, mainly security staff, senior police. I think there's been some investigated into how they handled the pushing back of the fans and the decision to put tear gas into the stadium. What's more important from that? You have to understand that a lot of things go on in Indonesian football. And at the very top, people chop and change all the time. A new president comes in, a new boss comes in, a new this comes in. They're just names. At the end of the day, we go to work. I coach a professional team. The players go to work. They play for the teams. Supporters come to watch the games. The top level isn't really important to those people who attend the games and are involved in the games. What is important is systematically what is going on in these games to make sure that, firstly, supporters are safe. I don't think players necessarily worry for their safety. I think they worry that their fans are not in a good state. Their fans are in a bad situation. But I think there's a lot of concern as to how far this was allowed to go and how much. I mean, the Hillsborough disaster, I remember to this day. And I was much younger then, but I still remember it so well. And this was nearly double the figures that were tragically lost. I mean, it can't be underestimated how bad a tragedy this is. And sadly, I think because we've almost had a little taste of it in the past, maybe not to this extent, but people have died at football matches in this country while I've been in the country. The fact that so many have passed away, that this was so tragic, this was such a serious event, that things have to change. And it can't simply just be blamed on the police's reaction. It can't be, because the police didn't go into the crowd and start the riot. The riot was started by supporters feeling the need to get on the pitch. Now, we don't see that in the Western world. We don't see that in the Premier League. Okay, it happens when we're celebrating, but that's all in good nature. That's celebrating with the players, and honestly, the players love it. But in this situation, they lost the game of football. They didn't lose a final. They didn't lose the World Cup. They lost against a local rival for 3 points in a league game. They've still got to play them again. So at the end of the day, did it really warrant that reaction? That reaction came from the supporter groups. That came from the supporters themselves. That need to go and remonstrate with someone who's just run hard for 90 minutes to represent your football club and ultimately just lost. Just simply lost. They were a yard shorter, whatever you want to, however that you want to term it. But that need to get on the pitch, there's responsibility that comes with that. You made the decision to run onto the pitch. You made the decision to start a chain of events that led to 100+ victims. So there has to be a reform from supporters groups as well as police. It can't just be all on the police. Yes, the police were heavy-handed. Yes, we need to know about the protocol, about what's going to happen from here on in. And there's an argument from the Arema supporters that, well, the police kicked off so hard that we didn't know what we were doing. Well, they wouldn't have had to kick off so hard if you weren't on the pitch in the first place. And it's something that we have seen many times in Indonesian football. Pitch invasions are fairly common. It's happened to me a number of times. I've been held on the pitch under armed guard before to keep me away from riots. Well, there's a riot going on around us and all the players are in the middle of the pitch in the centre circle chatting about how the game was going, kind of casually. This undercurrent tends to happen. But it cannot now be allowed to go to an extent where there might be loss of life due to what? Losing the game of football. It's not acceptable. It's just simply not acceptable, and it has to change. So there's a huge amount of reform needed from a number of different parties within a game of football, if you like. The players they go there, they do their job, and they witness it. The supporters are supposed to go, watch the players, witness it, go home. Support, shout, cheer, great, go home. This time, 100+ didn't get to go home. Now, there has to be responsibility, and it can't just be laid at the police's feet. Supporters have to take responsibility for that. We saw all across Indonesia last night, there was candlelight vigils. Incredibly moving wherever you go. They were all over the country, and all the fans groups coming together. Fantastic. But will they still be able to come together and discuss how supporter groups act at football matches? There has to be a responsibility with adults behaving themselves. They can't just be allowed to run free. Of course, the police, the president of the country is getting into the police now and seeing, are these games safe? Can we go ahead? FIFA are going to get involved. I don't know if they are already. FIFA are going to get involved. Indonesia is supposed to hold the U20 World Cup next year. You've got all the nations in the world who qualified for that competition now looking at Indonesia and thinking, well, is it safe to go? Are these games going to be okay to be played? So they're under a lot of scrutiny right now. And those within the game and those who still have to go into these stadiums are asking, well, what is going to change? When are we going to see change? When is this not going to be the norm? That's important from our side.
Right. Simon, if I may ask, of course, for our kapamitas that are watching this interview right now, reason why we're talking to Simon is he's currently based in Indonesia and has a very good knowledge of the landscape. He discussed it earlier. But I want to ask, where were you? Were you there? Or is your location near where the home arena is? And how when in terms of geographic location, is it really close from your proximity?
Well, at the time I was in the capital. I was in Jakarta, but we were watching the game live on television, and we were watching it going back and forwards. And as the game was going on, it got to the final whistle, and the guys I was watching it with, watching with some of the staff of Bayangkara Football Club, and we were saying, don't want to be on the streets tonight. Yeah, don't want to be on the streets tonight. Wouldn't want to be in Malang tonight after that result. Almost jokingly, almost tongue in cheek. Such is the experience we have of games like that. Not making a joke of it, but simply saying, wouldn't want to be in Malang tonight. And then all of a sudden we start getting reports about, all right, it's kicking off in the stadium. Well, okay, again, we kind of called that. We thought that might happen. Then it starts to escalate. Then it starts to get serious. Now there's injuries. Now there's deaths. Wow, this is well out of hand. But those within the game will probably turn around and say, well, this, maybe not to this scale, but that sequence of events, we've not been far from that a few times. But it was that like I was talking about earlier, it was that three factors that were all there and present that night. Normally it's only two. The fans went onto the pitch, the police push them back. There might be a couple of bruises somewhere along the line. That tends to be it. But now they were pushed back into a stadium that wasn't capable to take the reaction of the police. It's happened. So I wasn't too far away. I was watching the game on TV. I turned the game off as soon as the game finished, and then we started getting reports through. Currently, my family live in Bali, so I'm currently at home with family right now. But Bali is an hour away from Surabaya. Surabaya is an hour away from Malang. So we're within distance. And normally, if I was working in Surabaya, where a lot of our youth teams are based, I might have gone to a game. In fact, I was a candidate for the Arema job not long, probably 3-4 weeks ago. They've only just had a new coach put in. That's his third game. I was a candidate for that job. So who knows what might have happened if they'd have made a different decision. So it feels very, very close to home. And I just pray that supporters can see their part in how this went down. Please don't think I'm saying that it was down to supporters, but they simply have to understand that there is a responsibility that comes when you run onto a football pitch. You cause a reaction, and therefore anything can happen from then on, as we saw. Sometimes it can just be a guy getting whacked over the head with a stick, and he goes back up and he's got a cut to show his mates when he gets home. Yeah, I ran on the pitch and got hit by police. Brilliant. Or it can go the other way, and we see a tragic event, which is the second worst football tragedy that's ever happened. This is the responsibility that comes with running onto a football pitch when the police say you can't do it. So this is the reaction we need to see. Not just the police, heads will roll, I'm sure, but can supporters put their passion aside? Can they take their Arema tinted glasses, Persija tinted glasses, Persebaya tinted glasses, come off, sit down and really reform football from people that are going to the games week in, week out, because that's really what's needed. A different attitude, a change in the culture, which is monumental. I mean, that's a real difficult thing to do. But can they do it? Because we saw what can happen when they don't.
In an article that I was reading earlier, it mentioned that violence between football fans in Indonesia actually has a long-running history already. In the past 28 years, 78 people have died in football-related accidents. I also read that teams use armored vehicles to get to and from stadiums. You came into Indonesian football in 2012. But those numbers started 28 years ago. But how did it reach a point where teams need to be in armored vehicles just to enter and leave stadiums? And then it escalates into these tragic events where so many lives are lost. Since you entered in 2012, did you see any kind of shift in the culture since then?
Nope. I can honestly say no. I mean, if you, I tell you what, if you go back to 2010 when we first came to Jakarta with the Azkals, and the two semi-finals of Suzuki Cup in 2010 against Indonesia. If you talk to the players that day, we were in a hotel that I've stayed in many times since, and that hotel is less than 2 football pitches away from the ground. And it took us over an hour to get there because of the amount of fans that were on the streets. We had police in front of the bus pushing fans to one side so the bus could creep forward, and then pushing again so the bus could creep forward. And when we got actually to the stadium, and if you ask Phil, James, Neil, any of the guys that were there, they will testify that as we drove through the gates, the fans started rocking the bus back and forwards. So we're sitting on the bus like this, trying not to get too wound up with what's happening. And everybody's just doing this back and forwards because the fans are fully rocking the bus. Now, had we taken a 1-0 that night, that was 90,000 fans. And what was it? Our home game had 56, I think was the statistic. Our home game in that stadium, 90,000 fans not happy. Sadly, I've experienced that in a different sense when I was a head coach of Indonesia. We lost against Malaysia. And that's a similar sort of thing in terms of the way Persebaya see Arema and Arema see Persebaya. There's a similar culture there. There was riots that night. Police cars were overturned. My wife, who you know, got held in the stadium for 2 hours afterwards. She had to be protected to get out. The players were held back. There was fighting going on. And that was after an international game. So there is a long-running history of problems. And this is why I talk about a culture, not just necessarily idiots. There is a culture within the football here that needs change. It needs people to sit down and discuss, because people can't go to football and not come home. You know, nothing is worth that. Cheska, we've known each other a while. You know how important football is to me, but nothing is worth that. Fans can't come to football if they can't come home. Football shouldn't be played if that's the case. So there needs to be reform. It can't just be led by a guy on television saying, yes, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. It needs to be supporters sitting down and agreeing some sort of behavioral agreement, some kind of, right, okay, this isn't going to happen anymore.
Right. So thank you so much. We'd like to thank, of course, Simon McMenemy for giving us context on what transpired in Malang, Indonesia. And for our kapamilyas that are interested in this story, I hope that Simon gave more context, and we pray for the victims and their families. May they rest in peace. Lastly, Simon,
And may this never happen again.
May this never happen again. And Simon, lastly, to wrap it all up, you're there. You get to watch the local news, and you're more in touch with what's happening day to day. What is next? What are the resolutions that going to be discussed? And how is Indonesian football going to move forward from now?
Well, the league has been stopped for a week until there are full investigations into what happened, and that's led by the president of the country himself, not the president of the federation, the president of the whole country. Such is how important football is here. So,
President Joko Widodo.
Yeah,
right.
We've seen a little bit of movement with heads of various security forces and people that were involved in the night being removed. We've yet to see any, shall we say, disciplinary, because we expect something to be coming from FIFA. There, I mean, people aren't just going to stand by and allow this to happen. Indonesia has a history of it. You know, we've got black marks against our name anyway. So the next week or so is going to be very interesting to see who gets involved and what happens. Whether the league is just stopped for a season until everybody gets their safety protocol in place. Whether stadiums have to be shut down to be reassessed. Whether FIFA comes in and says, listen, until you can handle yourselves, like Cheska mentioned earlier in Egypt. Maybe the league needs to stop for 2 years and everyone needs to calm down and take a good hard look at themselves. Simply that. I genuinely don't know how it's going to go. In the past, we've not seen a lot of change other than fines and teams not allowed to play in front of fans. But that's not addressing the problem. That's not enough. The fans will congregate in the car park. Whether you let them in the stands or not, it doesn't matter. They'll still be there. They'll just be outside making a noise. They won't be in the stadium. They'll meet up in the middle of town. So I hope there's change. I hope it's led by significant individuals within each club who are prepared to come forward, sit down, put rivalries aside and say, this can't happen anymore. It has to be led that way, because the police will do their own thing, the army will do their own thing, the federation will do their own thing, and I'm sure FIFA will get involved. But unless the fans come together and do something about it, that undercurrent, that culture is still going to be there.
Okay, thank you so much, Simon, for taking the time to guest on our show. We know that you've been doing the interview circuits for a number of days now. Thank you for the incredible insight, and we hope that you and your family stay safe. And again, we hope that this never, ever happens again.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jessica.
Simon.
Thanks,
Stay safe,
mate. Take
Simon.
care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Stay safe.
you.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
There we go.
Medyo mapait na trahedya. Sasabihin natin sa Pilipino. Wow. Speechless, and thank you to Simon Cheska kasi he provided more context. Ngayon mas alam natin na hindi ko
Always
sasabihin
valuable
grabe.
insight from Coach Simon.
I won't say grabe, but it's really deep-rooted when you talk about the tradition, the history, the culture. It's how it is. It's embedded in the people and in the culture. It's not as easy as like, hindi, dapat baguhin mo to, baguhin mo yan. But, it may take a process, but at the same time, that is the result of years and years of the love for football, I guess. And you just pray for the victims and their families. May they rest in peace. And you mentioned, Cheska, may this never happen again. Any sport.
In any sport. All right. Thank you once again to all the Kapamillas who joined us on this Tuesday evening. We hope that Coach Simon was able to enlighten you on what's been going on in Indonesia. And of course, for guest requests, please send a message to @OTRMixCheska on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay, and of course, follow @ABS-CBN Sports on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Tuesdays and Fridays po, OTR Migs and Cheska. So this has been Off the Record with Migs
and Cheska, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Bye!
Bye.